In a previous episode of How Not to F Up Your Business, we discussed the importance of understanding your own skill set, where you want to go, who you want to be, and how you want to get there. Today, we're also talking something that goes hand in hand, which is good management and what that looks like. Well, in something we like to call the trust equation, it's about how management can trust and lean in on their people and their departments and have an absolute tight ship without having to micromanage a darn thing. How does this all look? Stay tuned. We're going to get to it. So, Johnny, the trust equation, let's break it down for these people because this is a term that we have used and coined and belongs to us. The trust equation.
The trust equation. Yeah, trust, I think, is one of those words that gets thrown around, kind of like authenticity, where it's often thrown around, but not necessarily lived up to in a meaningful way. Um, People may say that they are trusting, but their actions betray the words. And I think it's very important in terms of, so in many ways, when you look at trust, it's like, what does that mean? Well, if it's a partnership, or whether it's you have employees or whatever that happens to be, is are you allowing them to run with something or follow down a path to come up with a solution versus simply telling them what the solution is without their discovery. Part of it is, if you're working for someone, assuming and trusting that the leader, that their path is the right one, and just kind of following it. There are all of these sort of layers to what we think trust actually is. But when you really start to dive into what the actions are behind the words, they don't align. And there's a very specific way to look at trust that I think is for the benefit of a company or for you as an individual, versus the other way, which could be a very real detriment. You mentioned micromanagement. That's one of the biggest ones. Is, are you telling people you trust them, and then all of a sudden you're watching over their every single move? That doesn't feel very trusting. It doesn't. Yeah, I mean, what are some of the ways, Brian? I think you're really eloquent about sort of laying some of these examples out. I talk about micromanagement, but there's so many others that are out there.
Well, I mean, it really breaks down to alignment, right? We can trust employees, we can trust colleagues to attempt something, to as you said, you give somebody the ability and you sit there over their shoulder. In some cases, some people do need guidance because their vision of what is not necessarily appropriate for the situation or appropriate for the mission of the company. When you're working with a business partner like the two of us, I have absolute and complete faith and trust in what you're setting ahead of us. Doesn't mean I'm not going to question it. But when a decision is made, it's made and I'm on board. If I understand the why behind something, I function a lot better. So for me, trust is about a little bit about consensus, a lot of bit about the explanation and the whys behind it. And when we have been at our most successful is when which usually falls upon me, setting up a process, right? I find out how everybody functions. I then look at it. I see tweaks that can bring us to commonality. I sit down with everybody and discuss what we're looking at and why we're trying to get there. Take feedback. And once I hand procedure over, I give people about a week to see it, to make sure it's bulletproof. And even if they're not fully in love with it, they know they had a stake in it. They know that I trusted their perspective, and brought it into the whole so that we're all looking together. So everybody benefits, everybody gains something. So for me, the components to the trust equation is consensus, alignment, and frankly, there's a portion of blind trust. I'm working with people who know what they do and do it well. And I'm not coming up into conflict with that. I don't want conflict. I don't need conflict. I'm always in a place to learn. So go behind my back and we're going to have problems because it means you didn't trust me enough to talk to me directly. And once the people I work with know that I'm open, yeah, something might be frustrating, but I'm open to hearing, everything changes. And the trust equation is in place because every part of that equation basically equals out. It doesn't matter where it started, where it ended. You have everything from perspective to alignment to consensus, all looking at the same target from multiple perspectives. And that's tremendous. And I may be making a word salad here. So, Johnny, I'm taking my hands off the steering wheel and pushing
No,
it back
I
over to you
think
for a second.
there's a lot of stuff that you said that really resonated, and I was taking some notes. There were words that kind of came up in what you were saying, things like alignment, ownership. Um, there's that's the Zorro, the circle of influence, where he starts out with a very small circle, and when he masters that, then the circle gets bigger and bigger and bigger until he's flipping off of tables with a sword. And that circle of influence is important because you talked about blind trust, but I think that there's a two-way street that has to happen. And so if the trust has to do with who you're hiring, well, the trust begins in the hiring process, which we won't go into that here, but the entire hiring process has to be built to uh, establish trust at a certain level and then have a system where that trust grows over time. And I think that ties into a lot of the whole, Zorro circle of influence and growing it over time. But some of the things that are really important in here are communication is huge.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not able to, I can think back in time. Like, so let's go back. Let's go back to, we've often said the business acumen that, we were lacking in some ways. I think there were some other things too in the leadership side that I think we have worked on over the last 8 years. But before that, there were things that I remember not being happy with the performance of someone, or based on something that they did, or that they didn't do something uh, to the way I wanted to see it done.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, now when you look back, you go, all right, did I set the expectation correctly? Did
Right.
I communicate what the expectation was? And then, while you don't want to micromanage, you should have moments where you check in with each other, and what they call it, inspect what you expect. Was that
Mm-hmm.
happening? And was that happening in the correct way? So there are little systems that kind of play with each other to make sure that the trust is happening correctly and that it's to the benefit of everyone growing together. So alignment, giving ownership, allowing them to run with things, communication, setting the right expectation, and then communicating if an expectation is not met, how you can course correct without you taking it back and doing it yourself, but allowing them to grow with that. Um, and then you mentioned something that was, I think it's at the core of this, is every individual is so different. Do you know, like you mentioned that for you, you have to know the why. Others might just need to know the how.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's on us as leaders to understand people and understand, like,
Right.
what is it that each of our individuals who are with us, whether it's our business partner, I've had to learn a lot. And we have a lot of conversations where I say, look, I'm falling short in how I'm communicating with you,
Mm-hmm.
because this is what works for me. But when I feed it to you, it doesn't hit the same. So I have to, one of the places where I'm doing some work to understand is how I can take what I'm thinking in my brain and then, communicating that with you. And we keep going back and forth on that, which is great. But it's on us as leaders to then understand people and understand what is it that, if you have 8 people on your staff or 10 people on your staff, they're not 10, it's not a homogenous crew. Hopefully it's not.
No.
They're all individuals, and each one of them is going to learn and do very differently. Some might take more time up front.
Mm-hmm.
Some might want to jump in like, blunt force and jump in and learn by doing and make mistakes by doing. And then the other part of it is, so knowing the individual and what kind of learner they are, but then how much how are you accepting failure
Mm-hmm.
on the team's behalf? How good are you that when something goes wrong, that you're it doesn't cause a moment of anxiety where they think that they're gone, they're going to lose their job, helping them accept failure and see that failure is really just another learning point, um, when done correctly, not because of not working or not or whatever. I think all of those things are the things that ultimately really help to build up real trust in an organization.
I agree with that. I think there's another slight shading to it, if you will. You and I met in an, I won't say healthy or unhealthy environment, but you and I both met in an environment where we had two masters, two bosses that would constantly contradict each other. So we made it very specific. I would handle a lot of the logistics and you would handle a lot of the creative. It was always funny to me when anybody would have an issue with either one of us from the creative or whatever and come to one of us and say, well, blah, blah, blah. It's like, just talk to them. Just talk. We have never screamed at somebody. We have never come down on anybody for voicing an opinion or saying I'm confused or having, it's when you don't speak is when usually there's an issue. And I remember one time a story was being created and the person just couldn't get their arms around what you wanted from them. I also remember one time where I was color correcting and someone went to you instead of coming to me and saying, Bryan's doing it all wrong. He's doing it this way. And your advice was go ask him why he's doing it that way. They never did. But in the next discussion with everybody, hey, I took a little bit of a different approach. This is why I did it. And you could just sort of see them tensing up. It's like, no secrets. Let's just do the job. We're here to do better. And if you understand why I'm doing something, then you don't feel like telling on me. You feel like approaching me. It's like, hey, I've noticed this. That goes against the norm. Why are you doing it that way? Oh, I wasn't aware I was. Maybe you're going to change something in me. Maybe you're going to make me better. So as leaders, as managers, as bosses, we have to be open with that. And you can't be upset if you're open with it about somebody approaching you and having a conversation. If somebody goes behind your back and calls you out on something, well, is that the way you want it done for you as well? Because happy to do that, happy to be reciprocal. Not really, but that's almost the environment you have to set up. And that goes back to that trust equation. If you trust that this works better for this, then share that with me. If you really have trust in process, procedure, approach, then share it. Don't squander it. As a teacher, I know one of the things I always said was, I want to share every last trick and tip I have with everybody around me because it forces me to go to the well to learn more to share. That's the way I operate. Trust is very similar. If you want trust, you have to give it. It doesn't mean things are always going to go well. But what it does mean is it's a great foundation for learning why it didn't go well or what's the next step. Handing somebody the keys to produce is an iffy situation. Are they ready for it? Let's see. Ask them. Query them. Okay, they're ready for it. You hand them the key and they think producing is something different than it is. Well, I trusted them. It didn't go well. Have to sweep in, explaining why it didn't go well, trying to give them the opportunity to salvage it. Will they rise from the ashes? Maybe. And if they don't, okay. My trust now is not going to focus on that. I'm not going to beat them over that, but I'm going to shift their talents to where they lie. And that's part of the trust too. Do your people trust you to give them more work? And if they do blow something, will they get another chance? And if they don't get another chance, will you give them other opportunities? And if the answer to that is no, 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 you either shouldn't be their boss or they shouldn't be working for you. And it's not always that they shouldn't be working for you. Sometimes it's that you shouldn't be their boss. It's you've got to be able to be open. And that's why it's an equation. It's not just trust and reciprocity. There's an equation to it. If A, if B, can you move on to C? Is it a transient property? You've got to keep looking at it as its own system. Trust is a system. And if you can be open with it, you can move on to some pretty amazing things in your work life. So
That's amazing. I love it. And as a leader, it's important that you're accountable. So if it's something
hmm
that you did, some a failure that you might have had, something didn't go quite right, if you own it, with others and they see that moment, I think it sets things up in a way where there's less fear around, that admission of something that didn't go quite as right as it should have. And you're doing it in the spirit of like, we got to course correct. Let's do this. How do we solve for this? How do we change this scenario, that sort of thing. So accountability is huge. I can remember when there were things that weren't coming up and they were being almost hidden. And I know when I've seen in other organizations where one, you can see it as an outsider that it's actually the leader who is causing all sorts of rifts in an organization, but they won't own it. No one will call them on it. And so therefore the culture of the place is one of fear where there's finger pointing that happens. Something goes awry. It wasn't them. It was someone else.
hmm
And there's so much energy and time wasted on that, that even when things are working well in an organization like that, you're never operating at 110% for any client or for any project or even for yourself. There is a lack of growth in that. So ultimately, if you're able to be accountable and as a leader express some of these things and model the behavior, it can go such a long way with your team. And Bryan, you're right. Like
we
if
had to
if
grow.
if that person, you could have all these things in place. You could have communicated well. You could have tell them exactly what's expected, and, what a process is that we do, all of those things. And if the person's still not performing, and you've had multiple conversations, either you're right, either you're not the right person to lead them, or you're not the team that they should be on.
hmm
And it's not a bad thing. They might thrive at another organization because it's just somehow wired better for who they are. And so those are those tough decisions that'll come up. But before you get there, make sure that all the other stuff is in place and that you're operating from that place.
It's funny because we've had to grow, we've had to learn. Like I know when teams are frustrated, everybody shows frustration differently, and I know my style doesn't work for everybody, and I've had to curb that because I don't want a negative impact on my team just because I'm simmering about maybe the way somebody treated my team, because I take that
Mm.
very personally. If somebody is miserable to us on set, which rarely, I think in our years together may have happened twice. But I take that very personally, and I don't take it personally for me. I become like a papa bear. I just like, but even that has to be simmered down. We talk about it though, and we have to learn to talk about these things. Like, hey, you will never be put in that experience again. I remember one of our employees said they were very uncomfortable around a particular person. Period. Didn't give any reasons. I'm just not okay. You will never be exposed to that person. Period. You're just not going to be exposed to that person, and we will make sure of it. Period. Will
Yeah.
that work? Is that comfortable enough? If the person said no, the next thing would have been to fire that client. But it was something personal. They knew it was personal, and we had the respect to acknowledge that. And they felt joyous that they would never have to be
Yeah.
enacted with that situation. And you know, they cited that later on as being something that they were really appreciative of. And it's just that it's trusting the people you work with to have your back, and trusting the people you work with to have your clients back. And those don't always mesh up. So what are you going to do? Well, the people you
Yeah.
work with, you have to have a certain level of trust with in order to not push them so far that they want to just run away. Um, you give people the growth and the experience they need, and trust that they will communicate, and give them every opportunity to communicate with you. And if you do something wrong as an individual, even as an owner, own it. Just own it.
Yeah.
Show everybody what leadership looks like.
That's a really great point. The one thing that I remember one time very specifically when you mentioned that idea of someone coming in and saying that they had a less than stellar experience. I remember one, and you mentioned it's only happened a couple of times, and one of those two times, the employee actually came back in tears. It was a very abusive client, abusive, and we had an open environment. There were no offices. We just had one giant open space. And I remember we just very calmly, just we comforted the employee and said, okay. And you're right. We said exactly that. We said, you'll never have to deal with this again. And I remember that we picked up the phone and called that client. And actually, before we even called that client, we called another who was involved in the project as well and said, look, this is where this is heading. We are going to close out this project and we will, make everything right. But this is what has transpired. And then we called the person who was being abusive and said, we do not stand for anyone treating our people this way. And we are officially done with this project. And the person very quickly changed tact. And this was a project that was dealing with multiple, actually it was a state, and it was multiple companies that were in this, but this one, everyone else was great. It was just this one. And they changed tact. And boy, didn't that everything changed. Like, not only did they, number one, there was a different person from that company who became the main point person for the project, not abusive. And the entire project went very well. And I think the employees saw it. They saw that moment as a big one. And that's part of it. All of this builds trust. So many
Well,
parts to it.
actually, I'm going to put more to it. You, except for me, you cleared the room because you're like, I need to make a phone call about this right now. Would everyone step out for 10 minutes? So there was also respect shown for the situation.
Yeah.
And we didn't need to expose our people to potential vitriol that could have happened on that line, because why exacerbate a situation? And this is it. When your people trust you, and you have faith and trust in your people, great things can happen. I'm not going to say that everybody always operated above board. I know there are people who are working on things behind the scenes and didn't want to tell us and thought we didn't know. That's the other beauty of it. When you know, you just know, and it's okay. It's like this is just the more open you are. And then we have another employee like, hey, can I use the studio tonight? I want to do this with my band. Yeah. What else do you need? Like that's the environment we want. We want open. We want honest. And they also know that if we say no, we're going to give them a reason. And that goes back to me though, because I always think the why is so critical. Like, now we'd really rather not. We have insurance issues that we can't deal with. But that wasn't the case. Right. We're just like, bring it on. Yeah. Have fun. Yeah. Just, lock up when you leave. Exactly. Those are the joyous moments. And I think we've all worked for those horrible bosses. We've worked for horrible bosses that try to micromanage you, belittle you if it doesn't come out exactly as what's in their mind, yet they didn't communicate that or give you any guidance, but somehow you're fully responsible for them not communicating. That can't happen. Yeah. That's a mismatch in the equation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the best, I think when you have that kind of, especially with a client, when that's the case, showing your people that, and actually it's two ways. If you're in a meeting with your team and you have a client that is less than communicative, showing them that you're seeing things that aren't being said and actually sharing with them some things that you're foreshadowing that we can try to mitigate right up front. And it comes in various forms, things that we do on the project, things that we might communicate out, over communicate, that kind of thing, to help bring in some of the information we need. They respond to that. They see that right away and they understand it fully. That also awakens their awareness during the project, so they're not just kind of going by the steps. They're actually paying attention to things that might not be present. And then it's the other side of it where they're reporting it. And you as a leader have to be open to what they're saying, take it in, trust that the information is coming from a good place, and then figure out a way to kind of work through it. So trust is a huge topic, and there's so many different moving parts to it. Um, Communication, expectations, accountability. There are so many different parts to it, but it is a huge important piece of the puzzle, and it's a part that we all have to work on as leaders, not only with each other as business partners, but then anyone that we work with, including our customers, our partners, anyone we bring in, contract employee, whoever it happens to be. It has to start from like right from the very beginning, how you
There's
set
an
it up.
absolute warning here, though. There's an absolute warning. Don't assume intent. Because of the nature of the way we divided our approach, when somebody came to me to talk about misconnection, they genuinely wanted to figure out how they can interpret. And it was information you needed because it was probably more about how you communicated with them than them communicating with you. It was a beautifully natural thing. I will tell you, when somebody went to you about my color management, just because of the nature, it's like, oh, you didn't come to me. Like I never confronted them, but it was like, you didn't come to me. Was that mainly to give me a middle finger, or because there was like, you have to be able to say no? Intent. Potentially everybody is doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah.
And whatever you feel, whatever history you have, put that aside. For me, it was more like, okay, you know better, but I need to give you grace here. I need to assume that you felt intimidated, you felt something, and not try to fill in the blanks myself. That's me needing to grow. Me saying, okay, stop. You might feel this way, but that's probably not where it came from. Maybe it was. Maybe in both cases, it was more of trying to give a middle finger to management. Who knows? If you come in with that approach, you will always lose. If you come in with the approach of like, oh, I see what you're getting at. Here's why I did this, or here's what I was going at, or, I see your perspective. You will always win. There's no other way to handle this. You will either always lose or you will always win. I'd rather be on the winning side. So for me, it's about putting my own bullshit aside and just saying, you know what? Assume everybody's coming for the right reason, not the wrong one. And you'll get to where you're going. And if you lead with that, and your people can trust that and see that time and time again, they will give you everything. The only way we got procedures in place, was by everybody seeing that there was an actual concern to see how everybody functioned on a particular situation, and then make adjustments, not make one and ram it down everybody's throat. And suddenly people are like, okay, you know what? That's not really fully the way I would do it, but I get what you're trying to do. Cool, I'm in. Mm-hmm. That buy-in is huge, but that buy-in only comes if you nurture people with this can-do attitude and this idea that we're here for you. And that's trust. There's nothing more. And we all of us, no matter how good we're at getting that trust and giving that trust, we could do better.
That's a barrage of imagery that you just left us with, and points to anyone who can name the movie reference in the comments below.
I'm not
That's
allowed
a beautiful
to.
bow. No, you're not allowed to. That's a beautiful bow, I think, to wrap this up. Trust, the trust equation. We used to joke around a lot with fake jargon, fake marketing and fake business jargon, and it was a little running gag we had. And interestingly enough, trust equation is something that just kept bubbling up because there is an equation to it, and all of these pieces and parts help to build trust. So let us know, what are some times maybe in your career, or maybe you've had some instances with a client that where you felt that trust was maybe shaky, maybe you found a way to bring it back around, or maybe a success story where you started from the right foot in a very specific thing with an employee or something like that. share those stories in the comments below, and we'll respond. And appreciate you guys tuning in, and we're going to see you on the next one.
Stay safe, stay healthy. Take care.